At my daughter Sophie's 6th birthday party, my father called from the military base in Kuwait, where he was working, and asked one question that split my life into a before and an after. He smiled through the video screen, watched Sophie race across the backyard in a paper crown, and said, "So, what did she choose with the $500 I sent?" I stopped breathing. For a second, I thought I had misheard him over the noise of the children and the music. "What $500, Dad?" I asked. Behind me, my husband Derek went completely still. His eyes widened, and the coffee mug in his hand tilted so sharply that some of it spilled onto the kitchen floor. My father's smile disappeared. "The birthday money," he said, studying my face. "The money I send every month." I gave a nervous laugh, because the alternative was admitting that something was terribly wrong. I told him he must be confused. I said we had never received anything from him, and that I would have thanked him if we had. His expression hardened in a way I had rarely seen. "Natalie, I have sent $500 every single month for 2 years, he said. "It is for the children. Birthdays, clothes, groceries, school expenses, whatever you need while I'm away." Then he stepped out of view and returned, carrying a thick folder. He began holding pages up to the camera one after another. There were transfer confirmations for October, November, December, and every month before them. Each one showed $500. Each one had been sent to the same account, with a routing number ending in 4782. I recognized it immediately. It was Derek's separate checking account, the one he claimed he used only for work expenses. My father pointed to the account information and said he had used the banking details Derek gave him because Derek had offered to handle the money for the children. My stomach dropped so fast that I had to grip the counter to stay upright. My father kept talking, but his voice sounded far away. He said he had been sending half of what he could spare from his contractor pay because he did not want us struggling while he was 7,000 miles away. He wanted Sophie and her brother to have real birthday parties and Christmas presents. He wanted me to be able to buy groceries without calculating every item in my head. Every sentence dragged another memory into the light. Sophie's decorations that day had come from the dollar store. I had made her cake at 2 in the morning after finishing a delivery shift. I had promised her we would do something bigger the following year because I could not afford the party she had asked for. Then I remembered all the nights I had skipped dinner so the children could eat enough. I remembered turning ramen into what I called an adventure meal twice a week so they would not realize how frightened I was about money. I remembered field trips they missed because I could not pay the fee, shoes I patched instead of replacing, and the day I sold my grandmother's ring to buy school supplies. I had driven for delivery apps after the children went to sleep and taken every extra shift I could find. Through all of it, Derek had told me we needed to budget more carefully. He had held me while I cried about failing our children. He had watched me blame myself while $500 arrived in his private account every month. 2 years? I whispered. My mind started doing the arithmetic before my emotions could catch up. $500 a month for 24 months was $12,000. I looked at Derek. His face had gone pale, and his hands were shaking. Coffee spread around his shoes, but he did not move to clean it. In that moment, the late nights he called overtime, the strange changes in his mood, the missed family events, and the excuses that never quite fit began arranging themselves into a pattern I did not want to see. "You have been taking my father's money while our children went without," I said. My voice sounded strange, almost detached. Derek opened his mouth and said he had planned to tell me. I asked what he could possibly have planned to tell me. That he had been collecting $500 every month while I worked 3 jobs? That Sophie had gone without a store-bought birthday cake while he secretly had money meant for her? I grabbed his phone from the counter and demanded that he show me the account. His fingers trembled as he unlocked it. The deposits from Kuwait were there, regular and unmistakable. Within days, sometimes within hours, the money disappeared through cash withdrawals. $200 at a casino ATM, $300 at another casino ATM, then another withdrawal, and another. Derek stared at the floor and finally said, "I have a problem." I felt something inside me turn cold. "You had $500 coming in every month from my father while I skipped meals," I said. "You listened to me cry because I thought I could not provide for our children. You told me I needed to budget better while you were stealing from them." My father's voice came through the phone, low and controlled. "Did my granddaughter eat ramen on her birthday while you had my money in your pocket?" Derek could not look at the screen. My father said he was sleeping in a barrack-style room in Kuwait and sending us money because he believed it was protecting his family. Instead, Derek had let me think my father had forgotten us. He had let the children believe their grandfather did not care enough to send even a card. I kept scrolling through the account. The dates hurt more than the amounts. One withdrawal matched Sophie's first soccer game, when Derek claimed he was trapped at work. Another matched her first dance recital, when I sat alone in the auditorium and made excuses to the other parents. He had not been working late or stuck in traffic. He had been gambling while I watched our daughter scan the crowd for him. Then I remembered the previous Christmas. I had told the children that Santa was having a difficult year. Sophie cried after seeing what the other children received and asked what she had done wrong. She made a list of ways she could be better so Santa would love her the next year. The memory hit me harder than the bank statements. Derek had received $500 in November and another $500 in December. $1,000 had arrived for our family, while I wrapped dollar store toys in newspaper because we had run out of gift wrap. Our 6-year-old had spent months believing she was not good enough for Christmas, and Derek had allowed it because admitting the truth would have exposed him. I looked at him and said, "You did not only take money, you made our daughter believe she was the reason she had less." Before he could answer, Sophie ran into the kitchen, her handmade paper crown slipping over one eye. "Mommy, can we have cake now?" she asked. I looked at her bright face, then at the cake I had decorated after my delivery shift. I forced my voice to stay steady and told her to bring her friends inside. The second she left, I turned back to Derek. I listed everything the children had gone without: new shoes, soccer registration, school trips, proper winter coats, and meals that did not come from the cheapest shelf in the store. I reminded him that I had skipped lunch almost every day to save $5. He stood there without offering a single explanation that mattered. My father interrupted. He said he was arranging emergency leave and taking the next available flight home. Then he told me, more gently, to pack the children's important things and make sure I was not alone with Derek if I felt unsafe. "You are done struggling by yourself," he said. "I will be there as soon as I can." He turned his attention back to Derek and warned him not to touch any of the accounts or destroy any records. My mother was already on another phone calling banks and looking for a forensic accountant who understood financial abuse. After the call ended, I noticed the paper crown Sophie had left on the counter. It was made from a paper plate, aluminum foil, and plastic gems from a craft box. She had been proud of it, and I loved that about her, but now it represented everything she should never have been forced to understand. My father had sent money for her. Derek had not only stolen it, he had stolen the relationship those gifts were supposed to reinforce. Sophie believed her grandfather rarely thought about her because there had been no presents, no birthday money, and no evidence of his care. Derek had taken that from both of them. When I turned around, Derek was watching me with an expression I had never seen before. His jaw was tight, his fists were clenched, and for the first time in our marriage, I believed he might actually hurt me. Children were still laughing in the backyard. Parents were still chatting near the fence. I slid my phone below the counter and sent my father a 3-word warning without looking down. Then I texted my neighbor and asked whether she was home. She replied almost immediately that her door was open and that she would come over if I needed her. Sophie burst back into the kitchen asking for juice boxes, and I smiled so hard it felt painful. I handed her the drinks with shaking hands and watched her skip outside, unaware that her family had just changed forever. Derek stepped back into the corner, but his eyes followed every movement I made. I knew he understood that I was creating an exit plan. One by one, parents arrived to collect their children. I walked each family to the door with forced cheerfulness, while Derek stayed in the kitchen. I wanted witnesses nearby for as long as possible, but I also did not want the children trapped in the middle of an adult confrontation. After the final guest left, I locked the door and placed my phone on the counter with the recording function running. Derek immediately began talking. First, he blamed stress from work. Then he said the gambling had started as a way to solve our money problems. He promised he could win the money back and insisted that he had only been borrowing it. I let him talk because every excuse was also an admission. When he finally acknowledged taking the transfers without telling me, I kept my face neutral, even though my stomach turned. The children came in asking about dinner. I told them we were having a special sleepover in my bedroom, and made it sound like an adventure. They gathered blankets, stuffed animals, and pillows while I set up a movie on my laptop. Once they were inside, I locked the bedroom door. Derek followed us down the hall and knocked hard enough to rattle the frame. I reminded him that the children could hear him. He stopped pounding, but I could hear him pacing outside. I went into the bathroom, turned on the water to cover my voice, and called the police non-emergency line. I explained that my husband had admitted taking money, that he was angry, and that I was afraid the confrontation could become physical. The operator gave me a report number and said an officer could drive past the house. She told me to call emergency services immediately if he tried to enter the room or threatened anyone. Her calm instructions gave me something practical to hold on to, while my hands refused to stop shaking. My phone buzzed with messages from my parents. My father had booked a flight and a rental car and expected to arrive the following afternoon. My mother had found a forensic accountant who specialized in hidden accounts and financial abuse. Knowing they were both moving toward us from different directions made me feel less trapped, but I barely slept. Every hour, I checked the lock and looked at the children sleeping across my bed. Around 3 in the morning, I heard Derek moving in the garage. The garage door opened, closed, and opened again. His truck started and idled for nearly 20 minutes before he came back inside. I did not confront him. I wrote down the time, described what I heard, and added it to a note on my phone. By sunrise, I had started a timeline covering the previous 2 years: late nights, missed events, supposed overtime shifts, strange withdrawals, and every explanation that now looked false. The next morning, I kept the children's routine as normal as possible. I packed lunches, checked backpacks, and braided Sophie's hair, while Derek slept on the living room couch. When I passed him, I saw empty beer bottles and cigarette butts around him. I took photographs from several angles because his condition contradicted his promises from the night before. Sophie asked whether her father was sick. I told her he was tired because I was not going to make a 6-year-old carry details she could not understand. After the school bus left, I drove directly to the bank. I opened an account in my name only, changed the direct deposit for my wages, and asked the banker how to protect the money I had earned. Before transferring anything from our joint checking account, I photographed the balance and the recent activity. I moved only half, leaving Derek's share untouched, because I wanted a clear record that I was protecting myself rather than emptying the account in retaliation. Back at the house, Derek's vehicle was still outside, and I could hear him snoring upstairs. I gathered birth certificates, social security cards, insurance documents, tax records, and school paperwork. His desk drawer was unlocked. Behind old returns, I found statements from the private account. The casino withdrawals went back 3 years, a full year before my father began sending money. The amounts had grown over time. I photographed every page and locked the original documents in the trunk of my car. While I was still sitting in the driveway, fraud alerts began appearing on my phone. Derek was using an ATM downtown to drain the joint checking account. I called the bank immediately, but he had already taken $400. The bank froze the remaining funds, and I saved screenshots of the alerts, the balance, and the call confirmation. The pattern was now impossible to dismiss. The moment he realized I was protecting the accounts, he tried to pull out cash. At school pickup, I went to the main office and explained that there was a family emergency. The staff updated the children's records so that only I could collect them until the situation was clarified. Sophie's teacher stopped me in the hallway and said Sophie had seemed worried all morning. She had repeatedly asked whether everything at home was all right. I told the teacher we were dealing with changes, but that the children were safe. From the car, I emailed the principal and asked the school to document any attempt by Derek to remove them. The principal confirmed in writing that the children would be released only to me. That evening, Derek's messages arrived in waves. First, he apologized and begged me to talk. Then he accused me of overreacting to a few mistakes. Less than an hour later, he threatened to take the children if I did not stop being dramatic. I took screenshots of every message, especially the ones containing threats. The speed with which he moved from remorse to blame to intimidation made me realize this was not a genuine attempt to repair anything. It was an effort to regain control. I contacted legal aid and was given an appointment with an attorney named Angela Price the following morning. She listened without interrupting while I explained the transfers, the gambling, the threats, and the children's situation. Then she began organizing the facts into categories I could understand: financial records, safety concerns, custody issues, and possible criminal conduct. She told me to preserve every message, avoid private confrontations, and communicate in writing whenever possible. She also started preparing paperwork for an emergency protective order and temporary custody, although she warned me that court procedures would take time and that no responsible lawyer could promise an immediate result. For the rest of the afternoon, I wrote down everything I could remember. I listed every birthday Derek missed while claiming to work overtime. Every evening I went hungry so the children could eat, every school activity they skipped, and every time he told me our financial problems were my fault. My hand cramped, but getting the history onto paper turned 2 years of confusion into a sequence of facts. Angela later said the timeline would help show that the missing money was not an isolated mistake. It was part of a long pattern of concealment and control. Around dinner, Derek discovered that the joint account had been frozen. He sent a message accusing me of being financially abusive. 20 minutes later, I received another alert. He had taken a $2,000 cash advance from our shared credit card at a casino ATM. I called the card company and froze the account, but the money was already gone. Between my father's $12,000, the 400 taken from checking, and the cash advance, the financial damage had already climbed far beyond what I first understood. I added the new transaction to the evidence folder and forwarded it to Angela. My father called during the children's bath from an airport layover. His voice sounded exhausted, but he asked for every update. When I told him about the cash advance, he became very quiet. My mother was with him, making lists of documents we needed and calls that still had to be made. They were angry, but they also kept bringing me back to practical priorities. Protect the children, protect my identity, preserve the records, and do not let Derek provoke me into doing something that could be used against me later. The next day seemed to move 1 minute at a time. At 2:15 in the afternoon, the doorbell rang. My father stood on the porch in dusty work clothes, with a duffel bag at his feet. My knees weakened when I saw him. Sophie and her brother ran past me screaming, and he dropped the bag to catch them both. He held them tightly, then looked over their heads at me with an expression that told me I was no longer facing this alone. Derek heard the children and appeared at the end of the hallway. The moment my father looked at him, he stepped back. My father sent the children outside to play and carried his folders to the kitchen table. He spread out the 24 transfers we knew about at that point, along with printed emails and bank confirmations. Derek eventually sat across from us, but he kept his eyes lowered. My father reviewed the deposits one by one. $500 in October, when Sophie's shoes had holes. $500 in November, when we were eating ramen several times a week. $500 in December, when the children believed Santa had forgotten them. Derek tried to say addiction was a disease. My father did not deny that gambling addiction was real, but he refused to let Derek use it as an excuse for calculated deception. He pointed out that every month, Derek had a chance to tell me the truth. Every time I skipped a meal, sold something important, or took another job, he chose silence. He had accepted comfort from me, while knowingly creating the hardship that made me cry. My father told Derek to pack a bag and leave for the night. Derek crossed his arms and said it was his house too. Rather than turn the confrontation physical, my father called the police and requested a civil standby. 2 officers arrived and explained that, without a final court order, they could not permanently remove Derek from a shared home simply because we wanted him gone. They did, however, strongly recommend that he leave temporarily to prevent the situation from escalating. With the officers watching, Derek filled a garbage bag with clothes and walked out while muttering that we were violating his rights. After the door closed, I still could not rest. I took the bank statements and built a large timeline on poster board. In one column, I wrote what our family had been experiencing. In the other, I wrote the casino withdrawal that happened at the same time. Sophie's missed field trip sat beside a $200 withdrawal. Her recital sat beside another. Christmas sat beside $500, disappearing into a casino. Seeing the 2 versions of our life side by side made me physically sick. My father stayed awake with me, making coffee, and letting me work without trying to force me to feel better. Around 3 in the morning, the forensic accountant my mother had hired called from the East Coast. She had been reviewing the account records and found that many withdrawals occurred within hours of my father's deposits. More importantly, she found 2 transfers we had missed because they were sent before the 24-month period my father first described. That brought the total to 26 payments and $13,000. The theft had started 2 months earlier than we realized. She prepared a preliminary report showing the dates, deposits, withdrawals, and recurring casino locations. The following morning, I took the poster board, the accountant's report, the statements, screenshots, and recordings to the police station. Detective Victor Hale took my statement and reviewed the documents carefully. He asked how the account had been opened, who controlled it, whether Derek had ever told me about the transfers, and how my father had obtained the routing information. He assigned a case number and said he would request additional records, but he also gave me a realistic warning. Because Derek and I were married, proving a criminal fraud case involving family money could be complicated. The prosecutor would need evidence that he deliberately deceived both my father and me, not merely that he irresponsibly spent marital funds. 2 days later, Detective Hale called again to manage my expectations. Criminal charges were possible, he said, but the case would take time, and the legal question of ownership might create obstacles. He advised me to focus first on protecting myself and the children through family court. The criminal investigation could continue in parallel, but custody, housing, and financial safeguards were more urgent. It was not the decisive answer I wanted, yet his honesty was more useful than a promise he could not keep. That same afternoon, I arranged for Sophie to meet with the school counselor, Rebecca Sloan, who had experience helping young children through family trauma. I told Sophie only that Rebecca was someone who helped children talk about big feelings. I waited outside the office for 45 minutes, wondering what my daughter had noticed and what she had blamed herself for. When Rebecca came out, she was holding a picture Sophie had drawn. Sophie had drawn herself with a large X over her body and written the word bad beneath it. Rebecca explained that Sophie had connected adult problems to her own behavior. She believed she had received fewer Christmas presents because she had not been good enough. Now that Derek was no longer living at home, she was beginning to wonder whether he had left because of her. Rebecca gave me simple phrases to repeat. Mommy and Daddy's problems are never your fault. And, you are loved no matter what adults decide. She told me not to burden Sophie with details about theft or gambling, but also not to dismiss her feelings with vague promises that everything would immediately return to normal. That night, Derek sent a long message offering to enter rehabilitation and attend family therapy if I dropped the legal proceedings and allowed him to return home immediately. The condition attached to his promise told me everything. Recovery was not something he was choosing because he understood the damage he had caused. He was presenting it as a bargain to avoid consequences. I forwarded the message to Angela. She replied that I should not negotiate directly and that any future communication should go through counsel or remain limited to necessary information about the children. My father spent the evening researching custody rules at the kitchen table while I made macaroni and cheese. He became angrier the more he read. Courts often preserved some parent-child contact, even when one parent had behaved terribly, especially if the danger was financial and emotional, rather than supported by documented physical violence. Angela later confirmed the same thing. Derek might eventually receive supervised visitation, unless stronger evidence showed that contact itself endangered the children. My father wanted him gone completely, but wanting that and obtaining it through court were not the same thing. We built a safety plan instead. We marked emergency contacts in my phone, reviewed which neighbor could help, and organized the records into duplicate folders. My father showed me how to store copies online and how to record the date and time of every incident. We discussed what to do if Derek appeared at school, at my workplace, or at the house. The plan did not make me feel safe, exactly, but it replaced helplessness with procedures. The next morning, Angela called to say she had filed for temporary sole custody and exclusive use of the home. She emailed a large packet of forms asking for details about our income, debts, living arrangements, and Derek's conduct. The section about domestic incidents forced me to reconsider years of behavior I had minimized: blocking doorways during arguments, controlling access to money, disappearing for hours, and making me believe every shortage was my fault. Angela again warned me that even with extensive evidence, a judge might order some form of visitation. She advised me to start a daily journal and write only facts, not assumptions. 3 nights later, pounding on the front door woke the entire house at 10:15. Derek was outside demanding to see the children. His speech sounded slurred, and he kept yelling that no one could keep him from them. My father stood near the door but did not open it. I called emergency services while Sophie came downstairs crying. I carried her back to her room and repeated that she was safe, even though my own heart was racing. Police arrived within minutes. 2 officers spoke to Derek outside, while another took my statement. By then, Angela had obtained a temporary no-contact order covering the home, and the officers explained that returning again could lead to arrest. Derek argued about his parental rights, but he eventually left. I wrote down the incident number and saved the doorbell time from my phone. My father sat in a chair facing the front entrance for the rest of the night. At 7 the next morning, a locksmith changed every exterior lock. After lunch, we installed a video doorbell, motion lights, and alerts for movement near the doors. Then we gave the children a simple safety talk. We told them not to open the door for anyone, and to stay close to me if an unexpected adult appeared. Sophie asked why her father's key no longer worked. I said he was staying somewhere else for a while, and that the adults were working out safe rules. It was the truth in a form she could carry. Detective Hale called 2 days later and asked me to authorize requests for Derek's bank records and casino surveillance. He said the investigation had already uncovered gambling activity going back roughly 5 years, long before my father began sending money. That history mattered because it showed Derek had not suddenly lost control after receiving the transfers. He had an established pattern and had redirected new money into it. Still, the detective repeated that records had to be obtained properly and reviewed before any prosecutor could make a decision. While sorting a pile of unopened mail, I found 3 notices from payday lenders thanking me for recent applications. I had never applied for those loans. I called each company and discovered that accounts totaling $5,000 had been opened using my name, my social security number, and an electronic version of my signature. The applications had been submitted online from internet addresses I did not recognize. For a few minutes, I was so angry and frightened that I had to sit on the floor. The next 6 hours were spent calling credit bureaus, lenders, and police. I froze my credit with Experian, TransUnion, and Equifax. I filed an identity theft report with the Federal Trade Commission and added the loan documents to the police case. Each call required me to repeat the same humiliating facts. My husband had hidden money sent for our children, used my identity, and borrowed in my name to fund gambling. One lender said it could not formally investigate without a police report, so I drove back to the station and filed a separate identity theft complaint. A family support worker later called with advice about keeping the children stable. She emphasized predictable meals, regular bedtimes, school attendance, and familiar routines. It felt almost absurd to focus on Friday movie night, while lawyers, banks, and police were involved, but she explained that children measure safety through repetition, so we kept going to the park. We read the same bedtime stories. I stocked the foods they recognized and tried to keep adult phone calls out of their hearing. 4 days later, a counselor named Jordan Wells contacted me and said Derek had enrolled in an outpatient gambling addiction program. Jordan explained that recovery often took years, and that relapse was common. They supported my decision to maintain distance and said family counseling would not be appropriate until Derek showed sustained participation and I felt safe. Jordan offered to provide monthly attendance updates with Derek's authorization, but made no promises about his progress. Real change, they said, would be measured through consistent behavior, not one enrollment form. 2 weeks after the birthday party, I sat in a courtroom while a judge reviewed the evidence Angela had organized. Derek sat at the other table with a court-appointed attorney, his hands folded in front of him. The judge asked directly about the money my father had sent. Derek said he had a gambling problem and had begun treatment, but he struggled to explain why he had hidden 26 transfers while allowing the children to go without basic things. When the judge asked about the payday loans in my name, his attorney objected to discussing an unresolved criminal allegation. The judge allowed limited testimony because the alleged identity theft was relevant to financial control and household stability. After reviewing the bank records, threatening messages, police reports, and temporary safety arrangements, the judge granted me primary physical custody. Derek was allowed supervised visitation every other Saturday, pending further evaluation and compliance with treatment. The order was not the complete separation my father wanted, and it was not the permanent protection I wished I could promise the children. Still, the visits would take place in a monitored center rather than in private. The judge also stated on the record that the evidence of financial abuse was deeply concerning. Outside the courtroom, Angela reminded me that the order was temporary. A full custody hearing would be scheduled several months later, and Derek would have opportunities to request changes if he completed the court's requirements. I hated the uncertainty, but the order gave us a structure. The children would live with me. Derek could not simply arrive and take them. Any contact would be supervised and documented. The following morning, I met with a prosecutor about possible criminal charges. She explained that the $13,000 my father had sent presented a difficult legal issue because Derek and I were married and the account was in his name. Even though his deception was obvious to us, a criminal case required proof that fit specific legal standards. The identity theft was different. The payday loans involved my personal information, forged authorization, and debts opened without my consent. She intended to move forward on that portion of the case, although she warned that the process could take months and might result in probation if Derek had no prior convictions. That weekend, my father sat me down with another folder. His emergency leave was almost over, and he had to return to Kuwait. He had created a trust account for the children that only I could access using 2 forms of identification and additional verification. Future money for school, clothing, and activities would go there rather than through any account connected to Derek. My mother planned to remain for another week to help with transportation, paperwork, and the children's routine. My father made me promise to call him about any new incident, no matter how small it seemed. Derek's first supervised visit took place in a converted office building with toys, cameras, and staff members in every room. Sophie had asked about him all week. When she saw him, she ran forward, then slowed when she noticed the supervisor sitting nearby with a clipboard. Derek told her the woman was there to help them play, but Sophie understood that something was different. She stayed close to him at first, then became quiet and watchful. When I collected her 2 hours later, she broke down in the car. She cried that she missed her father and did not understand why a stranger had to watch them. I climbed into the back seat and held her until the crying exhausted her. There was no explanation simple enough to erase her confusion. I could only tell her that the adults were following safety rules and that none of it was her fault. That night, Derek filled my inbox with long messages. One paragraph admitted that he had hurt us. The next accused me of destroying the family. He said his counselor told him to journal, but instead of keeping those thoughts private, he sent every version of them to me. I stopped reading after the first few lines and forwarded the messages to Angela. She told me to continue documenting them and not to respond to accusations. The next crisis arrived on a Monday morning when I found an eviction notice attached to the door. The landlord had been trying to contact us about 2 missed rent payments. Derek had apparently taken the money for October and November as well. We owed $3,600 plus late fees. I called the landlord immediately, explained that I had discovered financial abuse, and asked whether there was any way to avoid removing the children from their home. He agreed to a payment plan if I paid half at once and the remainder over 3 months. My father wired the first payment that afternoon. Gratitude and shame hit me at the same time, even though he kept saying I had nothing to be ashamed of. I considered moving with the children to my parents' home on the East Coast. It would have reduced expenses and put more distance between us and Derek. But Sophie's teacher said she was already struggling and needed consistency. Changing homes, schools, friends, and routines all at once could deepen the damage. I chose to stay in the district and signed up for several grocery delivery services. After the children went to bed, my mother stayed with them while I drove orders. My father protested when he found out, but I needed income that belonged to me and a way to meet the payment plan. The work was exhausting, yet keeping Sophie in her classroom and her brother in his familiar routine felt worth it. Detective Hale called the following Wednesday with an update that made the betrayal feel new again. Investigators had obtained casino footage for several dates listed in my timeline. On the day of Sophie's dance recital, the video showed Derek seated at a poker table. On the day of her first soccer game, another recording showed him laughing with other players. I remembered sitting alone in the auditorium and standing alone on the sideline, defending him to people who wondered where he was. The footage proved that his absences were not accidental. He had chosen the casino over those moments and then allowed me to lie for him without knowing it. The next update came from Jordan, the addiction counselor. Derek had missed 2 group sessions. When he did attend, he minimized the gambling and blamed stress, marriage problems, and financial pressure. The visitation center also reported that he checked his phone repeatedly, seemed agitated, and ended one visit early. Jordan said those behaviors did not prove he would never change, but they suggested he had not yet accepted responsibility. Enrollment alone was not recovery. The following Saturday, I was kneeling beside Sophie at soccer practice, helping tie her cleat, when another parent touched my arm and pointed toward the far fence. Derek was standing there watching the field. The temporary order prohibited him from approaching the children's activities outside supervised contact. I kept Sophie focused on stretching, while another parent quietly moved between her and the fence. Several adults formed a loose barrier without frightening the children. I called emergency services. Derek left before officers arrived, but the parents gave statements and I filed a report. One mother had taken a photograph showing him beside the fence. The responding officer explained that a single violation might not change the custody order immediately, but a documented pattern would matter. I sent the report, photograph, and witness names to Angela that afternoon. 2 days later, I sat in Angela's office, signing a request for a longer protective order and asking the court to suspend visits until Derek completed the assessments already required. She arranged the soccer field photograph beside the earlier police reports, the threatening messages, and the record of the late-night pounding at the house. The stack was getting thicker because Derek kept creating new evidence. I hated living as though every ordinary day might become another incident. But documentation was the one language the system consistently understood. That night, Sophie had her worst bedtime meltdown. She kicked against the mattress, cried until she could barely speak, and asked why her father did not live with us. She wanted to know whether he still loved her, and whether she had caused him to leave. I held her and repeated the sentences Rebecca had given me. Adult problems were never her fault. She was loved. She did not have to earn a parent's care by being perfect. Those moments were when my anger at Derek became hardest to contain, because the consequences of his choices were living inside our child. 3 days later, the judge granted a partial protective order covering the house and my workplace. Supervised visitation could continue only after Derek completed an anger management assessment. The judge did not grant every restriction we requested, but he acknowledged the repeated boundary violations and warned Derek that ignoring future orders would have consequences. Angela squeezed my shoulder outside the courtroom and reminded me that protection often came through a series of smaller rulings rather than one dramatic decision. My father returned to Kuwait soon afterward. Before leaving, he set automatic monthly transfers into the protected trust and reviewed the security settings with me twice. My mother stayed several more days and created a color-coded calendar for school pickup, counseling appointments, court dates, meals, and work. When she left, the house felt too quiet, but the routines she built remained on the refrigerator. I changed my work schedule so I could be home for bedtime. That meant giving up some delivery income, and money became painfully tight again. We ate pasta several nights a week and peanut butter sandwiches for lunch, but we ate together at the table. The difference was that I now knew where every dollar went. No one was secretly turning the children's sacrifices into casino cash while telling me I had failed. Detective Hale later confirmed that the identity theft case was moving forward. While the question of fraud involving my father's transfers remained under review, he sounded frustrated by the pace, but he said the payday loan evidence was strong. Sometimes I forgot that Derek might face consequences beyond divorce and custody orders. Most days, my attention was consumed by school pickups, counseling, bills, and helping the children sleep through the night. Several weeks later, Derek's attorney formally requested mediation about custody, support, and the home. Angela agreed only after establishing strict boundaries. We would arrive at different times. Security would remain nearby. The discussion would be limited to approved subjects, and neither of us would be left alone together. I dreaded sitting across from Derek, but mediation offered a chance to create enforceable rules without forcing the children through a longer public fight. The meeting took place in a gray conference room downtown. Derek looked smaller than I remembered, though I knew that appearance did not equal accountability. For 4 hours, the mediator redirected every argument toward the children's needs. We discussed supervised visits, treatment requirements, support, and housing. Derek agreed to pay $600 a month in child support, even though I doubted payments would be consistent. He accepted that visitation would remain supervised until he completed the anger assessment, parenting classes, and the other requirements already ordered by the court. The agreement also allowed the children and me to remain in the house for the time being. That mattered more than I expected. It meant no sudden move, no immediate school change, and no new disruption layered on top of everything else. The agreement did not return the $13,000. It did not erase the payday loans, the missed rent, the lies, or the years of memories now contaminated by what I knew. It did not give Sophie back the recital where she searched for her father in the crowd, but it gave us structure. The children had a stable home. Contact with Derek had rules and supervision. Support was ordered. Treatment requirements were written down, rather than offered as bargaining chips. My father's future help was protected in an account Derek could not reach. The school, the court, the bank, the counselors, and the people around us all had records of what was happening. I was no longer carrying the truth alone. For a long time, I thought justice would arrive as one decisive moment: an arrest, a confession, or a ruling that repaired everything. Instead, rebuilding happened through smaller choices repeated every day. Opening my own account, freezing my credit, saving each message, calling the school, attending counseling, and refusing to exchange safety for another promise. Sophie still missed her father, her brother still had questions, and I still woke some nights expecting pounding at the door. Recovery was not immediate or simple, but the house slowly stopped revolving around Derek's secrets and began to feel like ours again. The money my father sent had been meant to give the children security. Derek turned it into evidence of betrayal, but he did not control what came next. My parents helped protect future support, professionals documented the truth, and I stopped measuring myself by hardships someone else had deliberately created. I had not failed my children. I had worked, sacrificed, and loved them while being kept confused about the resources available to us. The shame belonged to the person who lied, not to the people who survived his lies. We did not receive a perfect ending. We received supervised visits, a temporary housing agreement, a payment plan, an ongoing identity theft case, and boundaries that still required work. Yet the children had stability, the truth was documented, and the money intended for them was finally protected. It was not the dramatic justice I once imagined, but it was real, and it gave us a safe place to begin again.